Please sit down, everyone. Don't make me all alone. Let me say that President Yeltsin and I will have opening statements, and then we'll begin alternating questions, first with the question from the Russian press and then the American press, and then back and forth. I would like to begin by thanking President Ahtisaari, Prime Minister Lipponen, all the people of Finland for their very gracious hospitality to President Yeltsin and to me, and for the extremely constructive role that Finland plays in a new era for Europe. This is my first meeting with President Yeltsin in each of our second terms, our 11th meeting overall. At each meeting, we have strengthened our nation's relationship and laid a firmer foundation for peace and security, freedom and prosperity in the 21st century. Here in Helsinki, we have addressed three fundamental challenges. First, building an undivided, democratic, and peaceful Europe for the first time in history. Second, continuing to lead the world away from the nuclear threat. And third, forging new ties of trade and investment that will help Russia to complete its remarkable transformation to a market economy and will bring greater prosperity to both our peoples. A Europe undivided and democratic must be a secure Europe. NATO is the bedrock of Europe's security and the tie that binds the United States to that security. That is why the United States has led the way in adapting NATO to new missions, in opening its doors to new members, in strengthening its ties to non-members through the Partnership for Peace, in seeking to forge a strong, practical partnership between NATO and Russia. We are building a new NATO just as the Russian people are building a new Russia. I am determined that Russia will become a respected partner with NATO in making the future for all of Europe peaceful and secure. I reaffirm that NATO enlargement in the Madrid summit will proceed, and President Yeltsin made it clear that he thinks it's a mistake. But we also have an important and, I believe, overriding agreement. We agreed that the relationship between the United States and Russia and the benefits of cooperation between NATO and Russia are too important to be jeopardized. We didn't come here expecting to change each other's mind about our disagreement, but we both did come here hoping to find a way of shifting the accent from our disagreement to the goals, the tasks, and the opportunities we share. And we have succeeded. President Yeltsin and I agreed that NATO Secretary General Solana and Russian Foreign Minister Primakov should try to complete negotiations on a NATO-Russia document in the coming weeks. It would include a forum for regular consultations that would allow NATO and Russia to work and to act together as we are doing today in Bosnia. It would demonstrate that a new Russia and a new NATO are partners, not adversaries, in bringing a brighter future to Europe. We also agreed that our negotiators and those of the other 28 participating states should accelerate their efforts in Vienna to adapt the CFE treaty to the post-Cold War era by setting new limits on conventional forces. The second area of our discussion involved our obligation to continue to lead the world away from the dangers of weapons of mass destruction. We have already taken important steps. We signed the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. We extended the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We stopped targeting each other's cities and citizens. We put START 1 into force. And we're both committed to securing ratification of the Chemical Weapons Convention before it goes into force next month, so that we can finally begin to banish poison gas from the earth. Today, President Yeltsin agreed to seek the Duma's prompt ratification of START 2, already ratified by the United States Senate. But we will not stop there. The United States is prepared to open negotiations on further strategic arms cuts with Russia under a START 3 immediately after the Duma ratifies START 2. President Yeltsin and I agreed on guidelines for START III negotiations that will cap at 2,000 to 2,500 the number of strategic nuclear warheads each of our countries would retain, and to finish the reductions of START III by the year 2007. Now think about it. This means that within a decade, we will have reduced both sides' strategic nuclear arsenals by 80% below their Cold War peak of just 5 years ago. We also reached agreement in our work to preserve the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, a cornerstone of our arms control efforts. Distinguishing between ballistic missile systems restricted by the ABM Treaty and theater missile defenses that are not restricted has been a very difficult issue to resolve. Today, after 3 years of negotiations, we agreed to preserve the ABM Treaty while giving each of us the ability to develop defenses against theater missiles. Finally, we discussed our economic relationship and the fact that the strong and secure Russia we welcome as a full partner for the 21st century requires that the benefits of democracy and free markets must be felt by Russia's citizens. President Yeltsin recently demonstrated his determination to reinvigorate economic reform in his State of the Federation address and with the appointment of a vigorous new economic team. His bold agenda to improve the investment climate and stimulate growth includes comprehensive tax reform, new energy laws, and tough anti-crime legislation. To help American companies take advantage of new opportunities in Russia, we will mobilize support to help finance billions of dollars in new investment. We will work with Russia to advance its membership in key international economic institutions like the WTO, the Paris Club, and the OECD. And I am pleased to announce, with the approval of the other G7 nations, that we will substantially increase Russia's role in our annual meeting, now to be called the Summit of the Eight in Denver this June. Here in Helsinki, we approved once again that we can work together to resolve our differences, to seize our opportunities, to build a better future. Before I turn the microphone over to President Yeltsin, let me say one word about the bombing today in Tel Aviv, which we have both been discussing in the last few minutes. Once again, an act of terror has brought death and injury to the people of Israel. I condemn it, and I extend my deepest sympathies to the families of those who were killed or injured. There is no place for such acts of terror and violence in the peace process. There must be absolutely no doubt in the minds of the friends or of the enemies of peace that the Palestinian Authority is unalterably opposed to terror and unalterably committed to preempting and preventing such acts. This is essential to negotiating a meaningful and lasting peace, and I will do what I can to achieve that objective. Mr. President.
Уважаемые журналисты, дамы и господа, состоялась первая встреча президентов России и США после наших перевыборов. Естественно, она была сложной, так как обсуждались сложные вопросы. Наша встреча была
But as always, our meeting was quite frank, and on the whole, it was successful. And I'm completely in accord with what the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, just said. We have opened a new stage of Russian-American relations. We've discussed in detail the entire range of Russian-American issues of Russian-American partnership, which is quite broad in scale. After all, our countries in the world their national interests, and both countries did not abandon them. However, our two great powers have a vast area of congruent interest. This is the stability in the international situation. This requires us to develop as a result of our meeting. on chemical weapons,
Принято также
and we
российско-американское
also
экономическое
signed a U.S.-Russian economic
Но мы не
initiative.
только зафиксировали
But we have not
наши
merely
позиции.
stated our positions.
Подписанное заявление мы с
We
президентом США рассматриваем как
View
программу
the
наших
signed statements with the U.S.
совместных
President
действий
as a
по
program of
развитию
our joint action
российско-американского
aimed to
партнерства.
develop
Я бы
Russian-American
сказал,
partnership.
что оценка
I would say
российско-американского
that
партнерства иногда
emotions
вверх
sometimes
руководством.
get the upper hand in assessing Russian-American partnership.
Не будем забывать,
This is
что
not
становление
the approach that Bill and I have. Let's not forget that establishing the Russian-American
сложный
partnership relations is a very complex process.
что нас разделяло
We want to overcome that which divided us for decades. We want to do away with the past mistrust and animosity. We cannot accomplish this immediately. We need to be decisive and patient, and we have both with Bill Clinton.
твердо верю,
I firmly believe that we will be able to resolve all issues which, for the time being, are still outstanding.
еще раз
Today's meeting with Bill
будем
convinced me of this once again. We will be doing this consistently, step by step.
у нас
We will have enough of patience and decisiveness. And now I ask you to put questions to us.
Переходим к вашим вопросам. Российский пул. Общественно-российский
The Russian television, please, your first question. Boris Nikolaevich,
здесь первым впечатлением прорыва
our first impression
не произошло.
is that there was no breakthrough on NATO here in Helsinki. Tell me, can there be some kind of movement forward before the Madrid summit?
Я с вами не согласен.
I don't agree with you.
Как раз сегодня
It was today that we had progress, a very principled progress,
в том,
and they consist of the following.
да, мы
That, yes, indeed, we
свои позиции
do maintain our positions. We believe that the eastward expansion of NATO is a mistake, and a serious one at that. Nevertheless,
чтобы минимизировать
in order to minimize
негативные последствия,
the negative consequences for Russia,
мы пошли на то, чтобы
we
подписать
decided to sign an agreement with NATO, a Russia-NATO agreement. And this is the principal question here. We've agreed on the parameters of this document with President Bill Clinton.
это нераспространение
This
ядерного
is the
оружия,
non-proliferation of nuclear weapons to those new members of NATO, to
оружие,
not proliferate conventional weapons in these countries. We agreed on non-use of the military infrastructure, which remained in place after the Warsaw Pact in these countries of Central and Eastern Europe.
совместных решений
The decision of joint actions with Russia
тоже будет.
alone, this too will be included in the agreement with NATO.
Наконец, мы договорились
And finally, we've come to an agreement that this document
обязательным
will
для
be
всех.
binding for all. For that reason, everyone will sign this. All heads of state of all 16 member nations
Это очень
of NATO. This is a very principled issue, and we
договорились.
came to agreement on this with President Bill Clinton.
Все государства
That is, all states, all nations, and this will take place before Madrid,
подписывают
all
этот
heads of
документ,
state will sign this document.
мы
We sign
Биллом Клинтоном,
together with Bill Clinton,
дальше подпись
and then
генерального
there will be a
секретаря.
signature of the General Secretary of NATO,
И будем считать,
and
что и на самом деле
we will
этот документ
believe that this
обязательный
document
для
indeed
НАТО,
is
для России,
binding for NATO, for Russia, for all
лидеры которых подписали
states
этот
whose
документ.
leaders signed this document. So this is a very principled progress. We didn't talk about this just yesterday and the day before. We couldn't have. We can only talk about this now, during these minutes, once we've signed the statements with the President of the United States.
Terry?
After all that you've been told about how the world has changed and that there will be no nuclear weapons in Eastern Europe, do you still regard NATO's enlargement as a danger to Russia? And to President Clinton, this exclusion of nuclear weapons from Eastern Europe and the promise that there'll be no big troop buildup in the new states, does that mean that NATO's new members will be second-class citizens, second-class members?
Нет, конечно, никто их
No, of course
говорят,
not. No one will think of these as being secondary states. No one is calling that. That's not what's involved here.
Но, я считаю,
However, I
и
believe,
также считает и
and
Билл Клинтон,
Bill believes the same thing, Bill Clinton believes the same,
те решения,
that these
которые
decisions that can be
они
taken,
будут приниматься
they will be
всеми
taken by all
лидерами
leaders
этих государств,
of these
что
nations,
очень и очень
which
важно.
is
Я уже
extremely, extremely important. I already mentioned this.
Let me say, Terry, in answer to the question you raised to me, emphatically, no, this does not mean any new members will be second-class members. That's one of the things that we have committed ourselves to. There are no second-class members. What are the two most important things that you get, if you remember? One is the security guarantee, the mutual security guarantee. The other is a place in the military command structure. These will be available to any new members taken in. Now, we also want to make it clear that in addition to the security guarantee and participation in the military command structure, NATO is a different organization today than it was. We have a different mission. What is the most important thing NATO is doing today? Working in Bosnia. Who is NATO? NATO has a major partnership with Russia in Bosnia, and a partnership, I might add, with a number of other non-member nations who are in our partnership for peace, where we've done joint military exercises and other things. Now, on the two questions you mentioned, on the nuclear question, the NATO military commanders reached an independent judgment that based on the facts that exist in the world today, they have no reason, therefore no intention and no plan to station any nuclear weapons on member soil. Look, we just announced an agreement here that will reduce nuclear weapons, if we can implement it, within a decade by 80% below their Cold War height. Number one. Number two, the NATO members have just tabled a proposal on conventional forces in Europe, which would put strict limits and would freeze the conventional forces we could have in Europe now, along with having strict limits in the Visegrad countries themselves, which would be the areas where you might expect an old difficulty to arise in new circumstances. So I think we are doing the right thing, the sensible thing. If it is reassuring to Russia, so much the better. We have a clear, new, and different mission for NATO in the 21st century, but clearly not second-class membership.
Агентство Интерфакс, прошу.
The Interfax Agency, please. President Clinton, it is known that in your Congress there's some criticism frequently that you are a critic of, a supporter of the ABM Treaty. Today's meeting, did that convince you to strengthen the ABM Treaty?
You mean, some people have criticized me in my Congress because I do support the ABM Treaty. Yes, that's accurate. They have. I do support the ABM Treaty. I think it's important. I believe in it. And we have, I believe, strengthened the chances that the ABM Treaty will survive by the agreement we have made today and the distinctions we have drawn between the missiles that are covered by the ABM Treaty and by theater defense missiles. I believe that very strongly. There are those in the Congress of the United States, but they are not a majority. Let me emphasize, they are not a majority, who would undermine the ABM Treaty because they don't believe it's in our interest. I believe they're wrong. I believe that the ABM Treaty has served us well and will continue to serve us well, especially in view of the questions that we have clarified today between us. Laurie?
In light of today's attack in Tel Aviv, sir, you just said the Palestinian Authority is unalterably opposed to terror. Are you saying that there was no green light to terrorist attacks like Prime Minister?
No. What I said is, let me clarify what I said. What I intended to say, what I believe I said was that the Palestinian Authority has to make it clear to the friends and to the enemies of the peace process that it is unalterably opposed to terror and must take all possible steps to make that clear and to prevent any terror from occurring. This is a formulation that has frequently been used in the Middle East, but everyone knows that no one in the Middle East can guarantee 100% protection against terror, but all the people who participate in the peace process should guarantee 100% effort against terror. Well, I can't, first of all, I can't comment decisively one way or the other on exactly what was or wasn't done because I don't think any of us know. What I think is very important is that no matter how strongly Mr. Arafat and the Palestinian people feel about the Har Homa decision, nothing justifies a return to the slaughter of innocent civilians. It cannot be justified, and we have to have a clear and unambiguous position. And in the past, when Mr. Arafat has taken that position, I believe it's strengthened him. I also believe that acts of terror undermine him because he, in the end, is the popularly elected leader trying to lead the Palestinian people to a peaceful resolution of these differences. So I have made that very clear just in the last couple of days, and we will continue to work to that end.
НТВ, прошу.
NTV, please. The question is to the Russian President. Boris Nikolaevich, you said that this meeting started a new phase for the U.S.-Russian relations. What precisely new was introduced into these relations? Well, first of all, we finally were able to determine our positions on issues of European security. We've come to settle our position on NATO, and we have described for ourselves the parameters of the NATO-Russia agreement. Secondly, there's an unprecedented reduction of nuclear weapons, that is of START 3. That's 85% of the overall arsenal of warheads is being reduced in connection with it. That is significant. This is a very principled issue, and this encompasses the interests of not only our two countries, but of the entire European continent and the whole world. And the question on economics reflects a completely different approach. We won't conceal this, and I think that Bill Clinton will excuse me if I perhaps am incorrect here, but I think that a certain restriction on questions holding back on the American side on the Russian economic relations. There along the lines of the Ministry of Energy on anti-dumping laws and also the Jackson-Vanik amendment and many other items speak of the fact that the United States has not been that interested in developing a strong economic Russia, or that trade would grow in a healthy way between Russia and the United States. Finally, a breakthrough has been made. A joint statement has been signed. We've discussed these issues in great deal with President Bill Clinton. And on chemical weapons, that too. Any issue we handled, we've been able to manage a major breakthrough. We didn't discuss small issues. We talked only about strategic issues, and on all 5 issues, we were able to find an answer. We were able to find our common point of view, and that's what is reflected in our joint statements.
If I might just support that question, because I think that's a question all the Americans and all the Russians and others will be interested in. What came out of this meeting that was different? One, the idea that there will be a NATO-Russia agreement that all the leaders will support. That's a significant thing. We agree to disagree about the question of expansion. but we agreed that there must be a partnership between NATO and Russia going forward into the future. Two, the notion that Russia should play a larger role in international economic institutions, and that if certain internal changes are made, which President Yeltsin has already announced his support for, then the United States will make a more vigorous effort to facilitate investment in Russia. And third, and I think almost unexpected even among us, we were working along here hoping this would happen, we resolved a number of roadblocks relating to START 2 and the other related issues, which permitted us to say that President Yeltsin would seek a prompt ratification of START 2, and we would together support guidelines for START 3, which we would hope could be negotiated quickly after that, which would reduce the Cold War arsenals by over 80% from their Cold War height, to more or less 80%. These are dramatic and very substantial results, and I'm very pleased with them. Wolf?
Нет, минуточку. Я хочу продолжить.
Just a moment, I'd like to continue
Вы затронули
for a second longer. You've touched on a very current issue which has to be clarified all the way.
Вы понимаете, что
Well, you understand,
почему
of course, why is it that the State Duma has not yet ratified START 2? Because ABM was suspended. There was no belief that the treaty from '92 on ABM is not only being complied with by the Russian administration, but in the future, conditions are being created which would not allow circumvention of the treaty. In other words, we, for the State Duma, were able to prepare the ground so that the Duma could positively look at the issue of ratifying START 2.
Wolf?
Mr. President, one of the most contentious aspects of a potential agreement or charter between NATO and Russia was whether or not it would have to be legally binding on the 16 members of NATO or would simply be a political statement of intent. This agreement that you hope to forge with NATO, do you expect that the legislatures, the U.S. Senate, for example, would have to ratify this agreement, or it would simply be a statement that President Clinton would support?
что касается России,
As far as Russia is concerned, we intend to send this treaty and send this agreement to the State Duma for ratification. That's what our intention is. At the same time, we understand that if 16 states will have to coordinate this issue with their parliaments, this will take up many, many months. And therefore, we've come to an agreement that, given these conditions, it'll be quite enough. Of course, given the goodwill of these states, simply a signature from the leaders of these countries that would be affixed to this agreement. How the U.S. would act in this regard, let President Bill Clinton respond.
Excuse me, if you look at the language, President Yeltsin has basically said it accurately. We think it's important to get this agreement up, get it signed, and get it observed. Have it observed. And there are so many of the NATO countries. What we have called for is for each and every member country to make, and I believe the exact language of our agreement is an enduring commitment at the highest political level. And President Yeltsin described to you how we will manifest that. If our Secretary General, Mr. Solana, and Foreign Minister Primakov succeed in negotiating this agreement within the time frame that we all anticipate they will be able to, then we would expect to all meet somewhere and publicly affix our signatures and reaffirm our commitment to the terms of the agreement.
Itartas.
Itar Tas. The question is to the U.S. President. Mr. President, You, both today and on earlier occasions, said that you intend to transform in some way the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. After today's meeting with President Yeltsin, what specifically do the United States plan to do to change the current structure of NATO? Thank you.
Well, first let me point out we have already transformed NATO. When I became president, there was no Partnership for Peace, for example. There were no joint exercises where you had Russian troops, American troops, Polish troops, German troops, French troops, others. We didn't have these sorts of things. We didn't have a Partnership for Peace with more than 24 other countries regularly participating with us now in military planning and training and sharing and working together. And we certainly had nothing like our cooperation in Bosnia. I believe that the old NATO was basically a mirror image of the Warsaw Pact. And that's why I've been very sensitive to why the Russian people or the Russian leaders would wonder about what the new NATO is. There is no Warsaw Pact. There is no Cold War. We just made an agreement to work to cut our nuclear arsenals by 80% from their Cold War height, which I would remind you existed just 5 years ago. And what we need to recognize is there will be new security threats to Europe, and you can see them. You have we've seen them in Bosnia. We've seen them in the other ethnic, religious, and racial traumas that you have dealt with along your borders. You see it in the continuing disputes between nations within the European community. What we want to do is to provide a way for more and more countries, either as members or as members of the Partnership for Peace. Finland is a good example of an active member of the Partnership for Peace, or because of the special relationship of Russia and the special role Russia will play in the future of Europe and the security in the context of the Russia-NATO agreement. We want to provide an opportunity within which all of us can deal with the security aspects of trying to create a Europe that is undivided and democratic for the first time in history. I would remind you, go back and read from the dawn of nation states on the continent of Europe. There has never been a time when all the people were living under democratic governments and were free of foreign domination. That has never happened. So we are simply trying to create the conditions in which we can grow together. Will there be questions? Will there be skepticism along the way? Will there be uncertainty? Of course there will be. But we are not attempting to draw a different dividing line in Europe, just somewhat further to the east. What we are trying to do is to develop structures that can grow and evolve over time so that there will be a united effort by free people to join their resources together to reinforce each other's security, each other's independence, and their common interdependence. And I believe we will succeed at that. See, someone else in the back row here. Allison, you back there.
To both presidents, both of you have had problems with your individual parliaments, and yet
Seems
each of
to
you
be a
have
curse of
made,
democracy.
yeah, you each have made arms control agreements here that the parliaments will want to say in. To Mr. Yeltsin, can you guarantee that the Duma will follow your lead and ratify this? And to Mr. Clinton, how can you assure Mr. Yeltsin that you won't have a rebellion in the Congress over the anti-missile defense agreement?
Would you like to go first?
Что касается России, то я
As far as Russia is concerned, I expect that the State Duma will make a decision based on my advice.
Boy, I wish I could give that answer. Let me answer. You give me an opportunity, actually, to point out the full elements of this timetable on START 3. And for those of you who, if you haven't had time to study it, I want to make full disclosure here. Number one, I expect that our Congress, those who believe in the ABM system, but who want us to be able to develop theater missile defenses, which may someday protect all of our friends in different circumstances, including our friends in Russia. You know, who knows what use we will put to theater missile defenses when we have troops that have to be protected in the future. I would think that the members of Congress who believe in the ABM treaty but want us to be able to develop theater missile defenses will be quite pleased by this agreement. I think that that is not where the problem could come. Let me explain what we agreed to today, and I did it, I might say, with the full concurrence of General Shalikashvili and Secretary of Defense Cohen, who is not here today, but we checked with him. In order to implement START 2 in a way that is economically feasible for Russia, but does not in any way compromise the security of the American people, what we agreed to do in this framework is to set a date of 2007 for the full implementation of the reductions in START 3, but to delay the date of all the destructions in START 2 to 2007. We also agreed to move from the beginning of 2003 to the end of 2003, the time that Russia would have to deactivate the warheads covered by START 2. Now, since our Congress ratified START 2 based on different target dates for the deactivation of the warheads on the one hand and the destruction, ultimate destruction of the missiles on the other, we will have to go back to them either separately or in the context of a START 3 agreement and ask them to ratify that. And they will have a full opportunity to debate and discuss this. But I have to tell you, when the Russians advanced this possibility, when President Yeltsin advanced this possibility with me today, the thought that the American people might be able to live in a world within a decade where the nuclear arsenals had been reduced by 80%, and the thought that in addition to that, accelerating the time we had anticipated it would take us to meet the START 3 targets would save our Department of Defense precious dollars that we need to secure our defense in other ways and will therefore enhance our national defense as well as reducing the threat. Caused General Shalikashvili to recommend this to me, caused Secretary Cohen to sign off on it, and made me think it was a very good arrangement indeed for the Russian people and for the American people, and indeed for anybody else who would be affected by what we do on this issue. So, yes, I've got to go back to the Congress. I believe they will, once they have a chance to fully review this, support the decision I have made today. It may take us a little longer than President Yeltsin indicated it would take him with the Duma, but I think we will both get a favorable result because this is so clearly in the interest of the Russian and the American people. Would you like to take one more, maybe?
Последний вопрос для российского пула.
The last question for the Russian press pool. Boris Nikolaevich, what's your thought on the version that the Russian giving way on the issue of NATO's expansion to the east will be paid by financial generosity of the West? First of all, I don't see that that way at all. I don't see this generosity at all. If in the statement on economic issues, which we had just signed, if there are formulas in there that investments will be supported, investments going to Russia, and certain sums of money will be appropriated by the American side. That does not mean that this is assistance to Russia. This is assistance to the private sector for making investments in Russia. This is assistance to American citizens, not to Russia. Why do you see an exchange here? There is no exchange, and I categorically disagree with that formulation, that in place of one, we sort of bartered here, and as a result of that, we have come up with these ideas. I don't agree with that. I should say that even the order of looking at these issues, and we've held 4 tours lasting from 45 minutes to an hour and a half each. The order of looking at these issues was as follows. First, we looked at European security and NATO. Secondly, the ABM issue. Then we took up chemical weapons. Then we talked about START 3, that is the reduction of further strategic weapons, and only after that we started talking of economic issues. I did not know that the American side was preparing this. But you see, first we resolved and discussed all of these issues, and only then we approached the economic question. This should tell you that this was not a case where we used this as a poker chip.
I'd just like to support that. And let me say, first of all, what President Yeltsin said about the order in which we took these issues up is absolutely right, first. Second, I believe that the economic announcements which are made today are in the interest of the American people, both directly and indirectly. Let me deal with the indirect question first. Russia, in the end, cannot be the strong partner that we seek in the 21st century and cannot be free to help create a very different future for Europe and for itself, a future in which we define our greatness by the way we treat other people and by our success in our free dealings rather than our ability to dominate them. Russia cannot build that kind of future unless ordinary Russian citizens receive the benefit of free markets and democracy. That will not happen. Secondly, I believe that Russia has the potential to have enormous economic growth in a short period of time by attracting large flows of investment from around the world. If the elements that President Yeltsin outlined in economic reform and the legal changes which he has proposed to the Duma can be embraced, I would be irresponsible as President of the United States if I did not bring into play the Export-Import Bank and our other mechanisms for investing our money to make American investors competitive with investors from around the world for new economic opportunities in Russia. It would be irresponsible of me. If we do that and we put a lot of money in Russia, billions of dollars, will your people have more jobs and higher incomes? Yes, but so will Americans. And all the time I have to be looking at it. It'd just be like I can't walk away from Latin America. I would be irresponsible if we didn't try to invest in our neighbors in Latin America in the future. So that's the way I feel. A lot of the areas where you're going to grow in Russia, in the energy sector, just for example, just to take one area, are areas where American businesses have enormous expertise and literally decades of experience. We would be foolish if we walked away from the opportunity that you present to make money and have opportunities. So I entirely agree with what the President said, but I wanted to reinforce it from our perspective. Just a minute, the lady in the back there in the red dress, go ahead.
Newspaper Ilta Sanomat, I would like to ask something from both of you. How would you react, sir, if Finland would express its willingness to join NATO?
Maybe I should, you ask me both, and let me ask, since I discussed this with the President, he brought it up with me. President Ahtisaari said to me that he thought Finland had made the right decision to be a member of the Partnership for Peace and to maintain its independence and its ability to work constructively with Russia and with NATO nations and not be a member of NATO, and that he had no intention of asking Finland that Finland be considered for membership. But he thought that the policy of being able to be considered was a good one because it reinforced the feeling of independence and the security that Finland and other nations who decide to maintain relative independence and membership in the Partnership for Peace had. So I can do no more than to support the statement that your own president has made about this.
I too would like to respond on this issue. I should say that the reason we respect Finland as a state, its nation, its people and leadership, is the fact that Finland is implementing a course of a neutral state, of non-aligning itself to any bloc. This is very important. This creates a very stable and calm balance within the country. This facilitates good neighborly relations with Russia. We, with Finland, have a turnover of trade of 4.7 billion US dollars. This is 40% of the entire turnover of trade. Find me another country that could equal this sort of turnover in trade with Russia. There is no other country, and for that reason I believe, and of course this is the matter entirely of the people of Finland and its government, but that which the President of the Finnish Republic, President Ahtisaari, stated very clearly, that he is not joining any blocs. This calls forth a feeling of respect for him.
Let me say, since we took an equal number of questions from the Russian and the American journalists, but we took a Finnish question, let me, in the interest of fairness, Mr. Donovan, you have a question. We ought to take one more question from an American, so we'll be even here.
Thank you. I'll make it two questions, one very focused and one somewhat broader.
No good deed goes unpunished here.
It's a Merv question. The focus question is this. In the Russia-NATO agreement as envisaged, if there is disagreement, Russia disagrees with something NATO wants to do, does Russia have a veto power? The broader question is this. In the Second World War, it was very simple. We were enemies. We were allies, I mean to say. During the Cold War, it was very simple. We were enemies. Today, what word describes this relationship where the situation is not so clear and not so simple?
I can respond by saying that this is the way we solve these issues is by consensus. That's how it is today, indeed, among the NATO countries, and that's how it will be once we conclude an agreement between Russia and NATO, already with the participation of Russia.
The short answer to your question is a voice, but not a veto. And the answer to your second question is that we are partners. And like all partners in any partnership, starting with the society's most basic partnership, a marriage and a family, and going to business partnerships, there are sometimes disagreements. But partnerships are bound together by shared values, shared interest, and the understanding that what you have in common is always more important than what divides you. And so you work for the consensus that President Yeltsin outlined, and that's where we are, and I think that's exactly where we ought to be, and that's why we are not going to have the kind of cataclysmic bloodshed in the 21st century that we saw through 3 world wars, the Cold War, and countless others in the 20th century. If we can stay with that attitude and work on it, we will have Europe that's not only peaceful, but free and undivided. Thank you very much.
Спасибо.
Great.
Thank you.
I can tell you he feels great. He looks great, and he feels great. And I feel fine.
Bill.
Yes. It's good, huh? Very good. Now they want the pictures in the back? Thank you. Okay, shall we go?